So my name's Kisha Daniels, and my students, I think, lovingly refer to me as Dr. D, and I am okay with that. Sounds a little edgy, right? It's not pretty plain. And I have been at Duke. This is going into my 5th year at Duke, and I am an instructor. I'm an instructor in the program in education. Prior to coming to Duke, I was on the faculty in the School of Education at North Carolina Central University down the street. And I also, when I have time in my academic life, I'm also an education consultant for the Department of Education in New York City, where I was born and primarily raised. I was raised in the Bronx. And so I love having my connections to the Bronx and to New York City. And so I consult with the Department of Education as often as I can with schools in transformation. When I'm not teaching and working, I'm a wife and mother of 3. And we have a super busy family because we just got a dog, a COVID dog. And so that kind of rounds me out. So but I love what I do. I love teaching, and I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome, thank you. What kind of dog did you guys get?
Oh my God, he's probably some mutt. I don't know. He's like a cross between a lab, we think, and maybe like a beagle, if that's even possible, or a hound dog, actually. He sniffs everything. He's always into everything. And I always said I would not get a dog, and then COVID hit, and well, that changes everything. So why not change the rules? So my kids are very happy.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess jumping into the questions, our first one would be, can you just discuss the 5 pillars of hip hop and how they arose alongside one another?
Sure. So the 5 pillars are knowledge, MC, DJ, how can I forget? B-boy and B-girling, right? That's kind of the main focus of where I think we are here in this conversation. And they all connect together in that they really were built out of, I think, the innovation, the creativity of the time, right? And so Mitchell's learning this in my class, and I have learned this from not only kind of just being a hip hop connoisseur on a very low level, but also in connection with working alongside Dr. Mark Anthony Neal, who is the connoisseur of hip hop, right? Like he's the mind behind it, and getting into it. And so I see it as a nice, more of a collaboration than, I know that the pillars kind of uphold hip hop to be what it is, but I actually see it, if I had to recreate maybe a visual in my mind, more of an overlapping visual where you can have pillars, but also they're interconnected, if that makes sense, right? So I don't think you can have one without the other, clearly, because it wouldn't still be hip hop. But I do think that some of those pillars could be stronger in some areas, and you could still have an out or a product of a really exciting hip hop collab or a song or a dance move or something like that. But you can't do one without the other. And so I don't know what kind of graphic that would look like, but to me, it feels like they're more connected than just pillars. Pillars seem very silo-ish. So that's kind of my take on it. But again, they all came out of this amazing creativity and innovation in the African-American culture, right? The Black culture in New York City at the time, and then pulled in lots of other pieces of, sort of historical context. And so I see them again as being so much more connected than what maybe the visual of a pillar might lead you to think about.
Yeah, and then you coming from the Bronx, I don't know what part of the Bronx you came from, but I think we discussed this before, that like my mom is from Co-op City,
Yes, I grew up in Co-op City.
You did?
I did. I grew up
Oh.
in Co-op City. I lived there with, well, I mean, I was a baby, so I don't remember much of it, but Co-op City is like iconic in the Bronx. And I lived in Co-op City, and I'm sure my mother would probably like spank my hand because I don't remember the building at this moment. Even I've heard about it forever and a day. But I lived in Co-op City until I was like 4 years old. And then we moved to Long Island and then back to the Bronx. And so, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, like, with, especially I would consider like the epicenter kind of like the birth of hip hop coming from the South Bronx,
Yeah.
and your personal connection to it. How do you kind of like personally relate to like those pillars and how you saw it in New York City or in the Bronx specifically?
So I don't mind dating myself by saying that I have a connection to hip hop because of the Bronx, but I was born in the 70s. And so for me, I was catching kind of this, like the second wave of hip hop being monetized, right? So that's what I most remember as, growing up. So I would hear about it personally. Now, having said that, I have uncles and older cousins that when I was growing up, when hip hop was kind of just getting started, that they would always talk about sneaking out and going to these parties. And so when I started teaching about hip hop, and then I would hear about these parties, and it's on like almost all of the documentaries that you might see. They always talk about these parties. And so I began to make these connections, and I would call my uncles and I'd say, wait a second, were you talking about parties with DJ Herc? And they were like, what do you know about DJ Herc? And I was like, wait, were those the parties you were talking about? And I was seeing how things were, again, overlapping and connecting. But at the time, I was just a young kid, and I knew my uncles played music that sometimes I could listen to and sometimes I couldn't because it may have had curse words in it. But it was already a bubbling industry in and of itself, not an industry like we think about, again, back to like a monetized industry, but an industry where you can think about any kind of industry where things are moving forward and they are, like if you think of a processing plant as an industry, there are always connected people who are working behind the scenes to get this product out. And that's what I saw and think about those early, sort of years of hip hop was. It was its own industry before anybody came along and said, we want to pay you to record this on vinyl so we can sell it to the masses, right? That was not really the intent. And so I do think that my connection to it came when it had gotten to that point, because I mentioned this story in my class a lot about how I'll never forget my Christmas 1980, right? And my cousin and I, who are about a year apart, but we grew up thinking we were brother and sister because we spent so much time together. We each got like matching Christmas gifts, even though he's a boy and I'm a girl. We got Panasonic record player, and we got 2 albums. One was Michael Jackson's Off the Wall, and the other was Rapper's Delight, Sugar Hill Gang. And I can't forget that cover. I can't forget the moment I ripped the wrapping paper off and I saw that, and I was like, I have arrived. I am a hip hop head because I have this record. Little did I know down the line, there would be a lot of controversy about that. And actually, there was controversy at the time, but no one really knew it because that to me marked that moment when hip hop could be for everyone, right? It could be for other people. And I had my album to prove it. And so I'll never forget, I spent like 24 hours after Christmas memorizing every single lyric to that song. And so I have very fond memories of it, but I also know that what I got and then moving forward was not really the true essence of hip hop. When I unwrapped that blue album, that blue cover, it was so amazing. So yeah, it's got a lot of history involved.
Yeah, so how you like discuss like this kind of like you were kind of like right past the point of like this true, quote unquote, like true essence of hip hop. Can you like elaborate on how you think, either personally, like in your own experience or just kind of in general, how hip hop, how you believe like, or how you've seen like hip hop to kind of change over time?
Yeah.
I don't know if you would consider it like moving away from this more like true essence, but just like how you would like characterize that evolution, I guess, like good or bad.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
that's,
also,
uh-huh.
and also after that, can you just comment on where it's evolved to today?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of like a loaded question, right? I have to tell you honestly, I think up until I really started looking at all of the different facets of hip hop, not just as a genre, but also of its, and I guess I'm using this word a lot, but I really do feel it, kind of deep in my soul about how it's connected to so many other things. I think I was probably just like everyone else. Like if I heard a good song, I liked it. When my children were little, if I wanted them to have an appropriate affinity for hip hop, like I, would play it in the car, but turn down the volume if a curse word came on or something like that. And so I never really gave it much thought outside of it. I like parts of it and I don't like parts of it, right? I like some songs, I don't like some songs. But I always knew that not just loving hip hop, but loving music in general, especially lots of different types of music, but music that has a connection, I think, to who I am as a person. So all the Motown music, right? All of the pop music that kind of grew out of African influence and African American experience, right? And so I think that up until I really started focusing on rethinking the pillars and how they were connected to everything else, I didn't really appreciate it for all that it is. And I think, like anything else, it has its highs and its lows, its peaks and its valleys. And in each of those areas lies something we can learn from it. So I'm not a particular fan of some of the music that comes out now that is called hip hop. But that doesn't mean that it can't be a peak for somebody and a valley for me. Do you see what I mean? Right. And so I think what I have learned over this course, my own course of kind of growth and metamorphosis with hip hop, is really to value and appreciate the genre and not nitpick as much the artists, right? And or the songs. Because like we talk about in class, these categories of hip hop might be where your interest lies. So I think I am more connected to like the socially conscious hip hop. And maybe depending upon my mood, I'm okay with the kind of like nonsense lyrical hip hop stuff. But I think where I see nowadays, like my kids will come to you, and I keep saying my kids, and they are a young adult to adult, right? And so now I don't spend as much time turning down the volume when the curse words come on and things like that. And we actually can have really good conversations about what they're listening to. But of course, we always have those generational comments in our conversations in our home where my husband is good for saying to my kids, your hip hop is not like my hip hop, right? Or your hip hop is bad. My hip hop was good. Like we've even gone there a couple times. And so now I think where I am is it's not good or bad. It really is just more of what you want to choose to listen to, what moves your soul, right? So I can't tell my kids that Lil Uzi Vert is not a good rapper or he's not good for hip hop. If he moves their soul, he moves their soul, right? I'm always going to go back to like maybe early Drake or an early Kanye, right? Or a Grandmaster Flash, right, and the Furious Five. Like, I'm gonna lean on that. Although I'm not a huge, and I know that this may be cut out of the documentary and it's okay, I'm not a huge Cardi B fan. I'm not, but I respect her game. And I think she is great for what she does, right? I think she's great for women. I know people say she isn't. I think she's great for women, feminists. I think she's great. Her lyrical style is amazing, but she's not going to be the first person that I run to turn on my playlist, right? I think it's such a personal choice. So I would be remiss if I'd say that one style is better than another. I will say I feel like we're probably in a position now where it might be worth it to look at creating a new brand of hip hop, or maybe labeling one. And again, remember, I'm not the connoisseur. I'm kind of coming to it from a peripheral perspective. And so there may already be like a new name for it that I just don't know about yet. So I might need a little tutoring session from my friend Dr. Neil. But that's kind of where I feel like it's creating its own new thing that still can fall under the hip hop genre. And I like it. I think change is good, right? Going back to this idea of industry, industries change when people change and grow. We can't, keep the same cell phone. Now we need an update because the industry has to grow with the needs of the people. And so I think if you think about it in that way, hip hop's always going to continue to evolve and change and grow. And we should be okay with that, right? We should.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. As far as like, everybody's kind of having, their own preferences. Yeah, that's awesome. And so kind of moving more towards the course that you teach here at Duke, or one of the courses that you teach, critical pedagogy of hip hop, which I'm currently in. Mm-hmm. What do you believe is like the role of hip hop in education, or just like in a more general sense, like what can children or just like people as a whole learn from hip hop? That's also kind of a loaded question.
It is a loaded question, but it always brings me back to, so I hope I don't tend to go off too much on a like soapbox rant right now, but I always like think about why our hip hop artists and the early like bricklayers, so to speak, of hip hop are not celebrated during Black History Month, right? So it's bad enough that we only have 1 month, but during that time, I don't think in all the time that I've ever been a teacher, or that my children have been in elementary to middle school, because that's typically the years, that schools will do something special and have something that they do during Black History Month. Never once have I heard a Tupac or a Biggie or a Flavor Flav or a KRS-One or, Dre or Kanye, even like Queen Latifah. Like, I've never heard MC Lyte. Like, I've never heard of teachers embracing those, sort of Black iconic staples of music into anything. And I think that unfortunately, hip hop gets sidelined and marginalized in conversations around history makers, right? They are in and of themselves their own history makers. And so they get overlooked for the George Washington Carvers and the MLKs and, the Barack Obamas or Condoleezza Rice's. And so I think that, or even the James Browns or the Ray Charleses, right? I think they get overlooked. But when you look at just the art, the engineering art that comes with DJing, that was created largely by a Black musician who at the time was just like, oh, I have a problem that I need to solve, which is so much of what engineering is. He's like, I have a problem that I need to solve. I can't figure out or remember where I had to stop my vinyl in order to pick back up with it after someone has dropped a rhyme, right? Or this idea that he created the art of DJing should be celebrated all the time. And he should be viewed as a history maker. And that's the innovation and the creativity that I think gets lost. Being a lyrical flow master, right? Being able to use your words to move people and to put it to music in a way that's original, that is important to all of us. And so I do feel bad for hip hop in that way, that I don't think it has gotten its recognition from the education standpoint, from the creativity standpoint, from the engineering standpoint again, right? From the writing, just think of the writing that goes into coming up with some of the greatest hip hop songs. Like, that's talent. That's some serious talent. And so I feel that when we can start thinking differently about how all of those pillars and those facets, gosh, I didn't even just talk about like the dance element of it too. Creating methods to contort your body in ways, spin on your head for longer than 2 seconds, that's physics, y'all, right? That's seriously thinking differently about STEM. And so I again, I'm picking back up. So I feel bad that I think hip hop is not noted for that, because when you start to think about those systems that we hold so dear in life, right? Writing, reading and writing, math and engineering, physics and science, how can you not see that hip hop is connected? But I don't think people do. They just see it more as it's great music to listen to. Or if I'm trying to figure out, which side of a beef I want to be on, I need to listen to these 2 diss tracks because they are going off on each other. It's so much bigger than that, right? It's so much bigger than that. So I'm hopeful that I answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much. And I guess as a follow-up, I'm wondering how do we get to a point where hip hop is recognized in education? What in the world needs to change for that to happen?
Yeah, so I think one, really understanding and having an appreciation of the larger genre, right? So not just listening to the music, but digging down deeper. And I keep coming back to this idea about having the appreciation for the culture, because I do think that because hip hop grew out of such a dynamic culture, in such a dynamic place, right? You have to understand the history of that culture, I think, in order to also appreciate hip hop for what it is. And so that's why in my class, I kind of take us through this meandering history timeline to just show that what we have now, like the outgrowth, the product or products of those 5 pillars of hip hop, there were many things that came before it to get there. And so it is very much connected to what my discipline is, education. But it doesn't only have to be connected to just education. It can be connected to engineering. But then the people over in the engineering department, they need to understand how to make that connection for students who might need it, or for all students who just didn't know, right? And so for the physics department, like, wouldn't it be great if they said, you know what? There's this really weird, cool thing that's happening when people break dance that they do with their bodies. I might need to connect with the dance department to figure out how to teach this element of physics to my students. 1, because it would be really fun to do. And 2, because it's showing how we are bringing in other types of cultures into what we're learning. And so I think at the heart of my answer to this question would be a greater understanding and larger appreciation for cultural responsiveness and cultural relevance. Because, you know, I'm just thinking now specific to dance and hip hop, right? B-boying and B-girling. That has taken an international like craze, right? We don't just do b-boying and b-girling or breakdancing in America. Like, it is everywhere. And so I think the idea that you could use something like that, that touches so many people across the world, and use it as a physics lesson would be pretty darn interesting, I think. I might even want to take that class. And so I think it's a willingness to think differently about how we teach and what we teach, and the ways in which we can connect with the students that we teach.
Awesome, yeah. And then while you're talking, I was also thinking about, so hip hop, you know, comes from a long line of Black creativity and Black movement and Black oral history. And, you know, the hip hop culture in the Bronx, you know, grew out of Black and Latinx and other POC communities. And so thinking about education, it's often these same minority communities that are evolving this art form and the knowledge, and, you know, the creation of like these styles and forms. These same minority communities are often the ones that are, you know, not funded well for education, and where like arts are cut first. So I guess kind of, what do you see as either maybe like hope for the future, or like ways that things do need to change, for like, you know, with hip hop as like being part of the education system, like how that can help, you know, minority communities whom give birth to these amazing forms.
Yeah.
I think that made sense.
Yeah. And so again, I think it just ties back to cultural responsiveness, right? And understanding, if we had to focus, right, understanding all of the many facets, but focusing maybe on just one of the African American experience and or Black culture, and or maybe it's larger than that, maybe it's the diaspora, right? And looking at all how they all are connected. Because I do think that one of the fallacies that tends to come up is that if I incorporate hip hop into my curriculum, if I'm a, you know, K-12 teacher, it's going to appeal to all the Black students in my classroom, right? And that is not the case. Then I'm not saying that it is. And so I think that sometimes people might use that as what they consider to be an easy in, without really still understanding kind of all that goes with it. Will it appeal to some of your students? Absolutely. Might it appeal to many? Sure, maybe. But why not just use it as an opportunity to expose every kid in your class to history, maybe that, and not just history, but maybe timelines or events that have occurred, and connect it to whatever you're teaching. That's like just good teaching, right? It wouldn't be any different if I were focusing on another aspect of another culture and connecting it to something else that I'm doing, whether it's by a poem or a dance move or art, visual art. And I want to say, I think I left off graffiti when I was sharing and explaining earlier the pillars. I think I just jumped right into my conversation and I forgot graffiti. So sorry, graffiti, right? Visual arts, you're just as important. But so this idea that you can connect the art of graffiti to knowledge, right? Who you are as a person, because largely the initial graffiti tags that people would choose to write were their names. Names are powerful, right? That's why I kind of was asking Maybelle so much about her name, because I was like, this is awesome. What a nice, beautiful name. And I wanted to make sure that I got it right. But names are powerful. Names are personal. They can conjure up so much connection to family and history and generational, sort of connections. And so this idea, though, that you can connect graffiti, the art of graffiti, to who you are as a person, which could easily tie into an English, content. You could tie graffiti into broad strokes, right? Which can be connected to an art lesson. Graffiti in and of itself is not Black, right? It's not about Black people. It's just a pillar of something that is very much connected to a Black experience, if you think about it as connected to hip hop, or maybe even an urban experience. Because if you're living in Wyoming, you may not see a lot of graffiti on trains, but if you live in the Bronx or anywhere in the New York City area, you're probably going to see it. But you can connect it to murals. Murals tell stories, right? And so storytelling kind of ties us back to knowledge. And it just all can work together. But you have to start by just knowing the pillars and figuring out what works and what can and cannot work. And hip hop is not going to cure kids that can't read, okay? Right? It's not going to. You still need really good teachers. And for that, you need a lot of effort and support. And so I would love to see people understand more about, sort of hip hop and what it can be. I just don't want it. I don't want people to think that it's like the solution to it all, or that it's the thing that you need to use if you have Black kids in your class, right? That's not, we've gotten way off the mark if that's what people are using it as. And so it's a really focused and intentional use of the genre, not a superficial kind of layering of, I'm going to throw this out there for kids. So that's how at least I see it.
Yeah, that's a great point that I hadn't really considered, is like its use as kind of like an opener to like expose like more like communication and discussion of histories and shared experiences.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so we only have like I think one more question left. So looking more at service learning projects within your class or otherwise in local Durham communities, or also with your work with the New York City Education Board, how has the pandemic affected these like actions or these projects or movements, I guess? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it has changed things tremendously. I think on one hand, right, if I were to look at the pros, I think it's made me think differently and more creatively about how we can still offer rich service collaborations with schools and our partners on Zoom. It's difficult though when then it comes to figuring out, how that works. I think that right now we are in such a space where everyone needs so much support that it presents its own challenges because we are so used to thinking about support being direct service, where we have to go someplace, we have to see people, we have to be able to engage face to face. And so just making that shift of how do you continue support, high levels of support, but not be face to face, I think is one where schools are finding their challenge, but then also for the university as we are trying to continue, the connections and collaborations that we've had with organizations at the same level. And so in order to move forward, we had to kind of take a step back and say, well, what are the needs? We had to let schools and community partners be really open about what their needs were. If it was just too much for them to think about in the fall, we just had to give them that space and be able to say, we get it. We're here for you when you figure it out, or let us know if you need help figuring it out. Schools, tend to be, for our classes in the program in education, schools tend to be where we focus all of our energy and our times. And so creating service projects that they needed was really a challenge. It was. I think I'm fortunate enough, as well as my other colleagues in the program in ed, we're fortunate to have really good relationships with the schools. And so I think probably 3 weeks after the beginning of the school year, some of my former students who are now principals or teachers in the school would literally text me, hey, Dr. D, hey, Dr. Daniels, do you have any students who would like to fill in the blank, right? Would like to work with small groups of kids, and so I all of a sudden was like, great, we can do this. Let's figure out how we can make this happen. And that's part of, I think, the relationship building aspect of service learning that cannot be, you can't have service learning without relationships. And so having relationships in place already made it a lot easier to make the transition. But it still isn't without its challenges. And I think really it's a day-to-day change, right? And so like even this semester, it became tricky because we thought we had a plan for service learning, and then the legislature passed that or approved kids starting to go back face-to-face on March 15th. Well, that just changed everything, because we thought we had a plan through the end of the year, but now we had to, again, kind of step back to move forward. Some of the sessions we planned, now we can't have, because some students will be back in the classroom, some students will be virtual. Some schools are doing hybrid. So where does Duke fit in with a solely virtual, service learning platform, when some kids now will be in school? On the days that we had planned to do virtual, the kids who would be in school will be on buses coming home, so they'll miss the opportunity. Well, can we have a project where half of the kids in the class miss because that's the time we've chosen? And so again, it's like, let's take a break. Let's maybe rethink this, or maybe we won't do it at the full scale that we thought we were going to do it. And so again, it's just like a daily communication blitz where we're just trying to figure things out. But at the end of the day, the main goal is always to make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest for the partner or the students. And if we lose sight of that, then we just shouldn't be doing it. We need to just stop and say, sorry, it's not going to work this semester. We need to figure something else out. And when I say students, I mean not just the community students, right? The students who go to the schools, but also the Duke students, because you want to have, and as a faculty member, I want to support and create meaningful service learning for my students as well. And so it's just really this big kind of rolling tumbleweed that continues to just grow and grow until we can figure out, what makes the best sense for everybody.